Japanese Empire. Now, this entailed oppression for the Korean people in many ways. Some of these ways include the military. The Japanese military was able to take stuff from the Koreans without any repercussions. The Korean people were forced to bow down to the Japanese military, and during the occupation, over 100,000 Japanese people moved to Korea, cut down Korean forests, and settled in Korean land without Korean permission, and also took land and stuff from the Korean people. Many people submitted to this rule just because they couldn't see any way out of it, but some people fought back. These were the guerrilla fighters fighting the Japanese occupation, and these guerrilla fighters were led by Kim Il-sung, who will later become the ruler of North Korea. Another thing that the Japanese people did was during the World War II, they forced Korean women into sexual slavery for the military people. After World War II, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel. The north of the 38th parallel was led by the Soviets, and this meant that Soviet ideologies were instilled, and south of the 38th parallel was occupied by the United States. This meant that United States ideologies were instilled into these people. Now, for the South, this meant that Syngman Rhee, who was the leader of the South Korea, he was, advised by General Douglas MacArthur on what to do and how to run his government. And another thing that this meant was North Korean people were not happy with the fact that they were controlled by the Soviets, and they wanted to move to the American area. So millions of people migrated south to get to the United States-controlled South Korea. Now, during the Korean War, there were many different turns in the battle. At one point, the South Koreans in the beginning of the war were taken all the way back to the southeast of Korea. Their capital had fallen, but then they launched an offensive all the way up to the very northernmost area of North Korea, but then they were pushed basically back to the 38th parallel, but the truce line was drawn not in an exact straight line, but a little wavy line, but very close still to a straight line. This Syngman Rhee is the leader of South Korea. He was a capitalist man, and liked by the American people. And then Kim Il-sung was the leader of North Korea during the Korean War and after. He was basically looked at as a god almost, because that's what they believed in. And then one problem when they were talking about peace was the prisoners of war in the South Korean POW camps that were North Korean did not want to return back to North Korea because they liked South Korea more. But there would be no peace unless the North Koreans could get their prisoners back. And after this, the truce line, the DMZ was created, which is the Demilitarized Zone between North and South Korea. And the name is very funny because it's actually one of the most militarized areas in the world. Now, in the modern times, this is just an image showing you the difference between South Korea and North Korea. South Korea is very bright with all the lights, and North Korea is basically dark except for a small area in Pyongyang, and even there it's really dark. But one thing that the North Koreans did was when their leader died, they had a huge funeral, almost like they were mourning it was like the biggest thing ever. The people were wailing because they were basically mourning the death of what they revered as a god. They basically revered their leaders as a god. Now, the Korean nation was very focused on kids. They always stated that kids were very important. Yet, a big thing was outside of Pyongyang, if you were a kid and you lost your parents, you were homeless, and you had to survive as a kojibi, stealing from other people to survive. And outside of Pyongyang, the buildings are very desolate and not in good shape at all. And the funny thing about this is there's lots of propaganda about Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il with kids. They say kids of the future, yet they basically neglect the kids that are out in Pyongyang. And this is an image of a hotel that the government built when they could have spent that money on the kids that are basically starving.